Well, today officially marks 3 years since Russia invaded Ukraine. What Russian President Vladimir Putin dubbed a, quote, special military operation has turned into Europe's largest conflict since World War II. Tens of thousands killed, millions of Ukrainians became refugees, and Russia was isolated from the West. Joining me now to discuss the war's impact and what's next is Marcus Stanley, Director of Studies at the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft. Thank you so much for joining me. Help set the stage for us. It's 3 years later, war still raging on. What is the current state of the war in Ukraine right now?
Well, this war has settled into almost a stalemate near the Russia-Ukraine border in the east. The front lines of the war haven't moved for over 2 years, really since the first year of the war. But we're continuing to see massive deaths and destruction along that front line. We're now looking at over 1 million casualties total in the war, over $1 trillion in economic damage. And as long as peace isn't made, it just continues. And we also see that Ukraine is starting to run short of manpower to put into the front lines of this war.
You touched on it a little bit, but, war has so many economic consequences. What has 3 years of war done to both countries and its citizens?
Well, Ukraine, even before the war started, Ukraine was one of the, if not the poorest country in Europe. And the war has done tremendous economic damage to Ukraine. They've lost almost, actually, over a quarter of their population due to refugees from the war. As I mentioned, over $1 trillion in damage to their infrastructure. And their economy is almost completely dependent on aid and assistance from the United States and Europe at this point. Russia is a much larger country, about 10 times the size of the Ukrainian economy. They have been very negatively impacted by U.S. sanctions, but they continue to be able to trade with China, India, some other countries. And of course, the war is not on their soil, so they have not been as damaged as Ukraine has.
Now, President Trump on Friday mentioned being in good talks with Russian President Putin. Is there a scenario where you see this war coming to an end, and can there be any real negotiations without Ukrainian President Zelensky?
Well, two questions there. In terms of the possibility of peace in this war, it's not going to be easy, but I think that it is possible. What you have to do in order to get peace here is that Russia wants a militarily neutral Ukraine, a Ukraine that is not in NATO, a Ukraine that does not have a large armed force, hostile armed force on its border. But Ukraine wants and needs security and protection from Russian aggression. So you've got to kind of square that circle with a neutral Ukraine, but a Ukraine that is safe from Russian aggression. I do think that that won't be easy, but I think it's possible. We saw some neutral countries during the Cold War on the Russian border, like Finland and Austria. Those countries prospered. We saw Ukraine and Russia at peace from the early 90s till 2014. So I think it's possible, but it won't be easy. In terms of Ukraine and Zelensky's involvement, Ukraine will have to be involved at some point in these negotiations because there are aspects of peace that Ukraine has got to be responsible for. Whether that's Zelensky in person is an open question. Zelensky is not Ukraine. He is one leader. It's possible that there will be elections and he will be replaced, but Ukraine will eventually play a role here.
Stanley, Director of Studies at the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft, thank you so much for your insight and for joining us this morning.
Okay, thank you very much.
And for the latest on the war in Ukraine, head over to our website at cbsnewsnewyork.com.